Welcome back to Alive at 5. I'm your host, David Leonard, and it's my pleasure to welcome into our program here this afternoon Ben Hanten. Ben, of course, is the owner of Ben's Brewing here in downtown Yankton. He's a Yankton businessman, and he's been involved in a number of activities here in the Yankton community to help push forward a concept called entrepreneurship. And I wanted Ben to come in and spend some time with us today talking about an event that's taking place here a little later on this month, actually at the end of the month, called 1 Million Cups. Good afternoon, Ben. Welcome back.
It's always fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad to know that it's always fun. I'd rather have somebody enjoying themselves than squirming in the chair.
Well, if I was a political candidate, we might have different roles.
Well, yeah, that could change things.
But we always get to talk about fun things.
Absolutely. Right at the beginning, let's talk about something that I think is kind of fun over at the bar, the Copper Room.
Yeah.
Now open to the public.
Yeah, so I started the Copper Room 3 years ago, and if you haven't been up there, it's a pretty neat place because there's brick walls. There's an old 1880s floor where there were gamblers, and there was a brothel in the back. So they actually had the room set up. So there were 2 gambling rooms, and then in the back there was, I don't know how to say this eloquently, but like a 3-stall brothel.
Okay.
And, Yankton had a checkered history or a fun history or a bad history, however you want to look at it. And the good thing is that floor, which some of you might have seen at Diamond Don's shoe store, is still there, and it's really unique. It's hand-cut floor that's been hand-nailed, just real craftsmanship. And so we opened this bar up 3 years ago, built a bar out of copper, and tried to build this really fun vibe. And we set it up for private parties only, so birthday parties, retirements, anniversaries, company Christmas parties, and that went really well. The bad side is, though, that if you wanted to enjoy that room, you said, hey, this is a really neat bar, the only chance you were going to get up there is if you were invited to something. And so I decided that it was time to make a change. And so we opened it up to the public at the end of September, and we're open on the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturdays. We really made a craft cocktail bar. So I do some traveling, and when I go to New York and Chicago and Omaha and Las Vegas or Honolulu or anywhere, I'm always attracted to these cocktail bars where they have martinis and whiskey drinks and bourbons and scotches that you'd never find around here. And I thought, why can't we do that here? So we created a bar that is now open to the public that's completely different from downstairs. Downstairs is the open every day sports, 20 beers on tap, whereas upstairs is like a little more chill vibe. Couches, lounge chairs, different lighting, and you still get that brick wall wood floor, but now we're bringing in some really unique stuff.
Tell me a little bit about when you talk about a cocktail bar like that. That is a little bit different concept for the Yankton area, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So when we think about cocktails around here, I think a lot of times we think about Captain and Coke and whiskey Coke and
gin and tonic.
Yeah, and that's fine. You can still get those there. But, one of the drinks that I kind of borrowed from one of my travels and tried to recreate it is called Trinidad Smoke. And so I take this Trinidad rum, then I make a couple simple syrups. One of them is a pipe tobacco simple syrup. And then I do cinnamon and cloves and make those into another simple syrup. And we stir that up, and we actually infuse real pipe tobacco with it. And so it comes out smoking. And we do some really fun things like that. And that has by far been the most popular drink. And so we're saying, this might be harder bartending, but it's really fun. And we get to experiment with a lot of flavors that you wouldn't otherwise. All the juices are made by hand. We squeeze all the lemons and limes instead of just pouring them out of a sugary bottle.
Well, I have to ask, are you serving any absinthe up there?
We are. And so absinthe made its appearance legally into South Dakota and the U.S. about 4 or 5 years ago. If you remember, that's what Vincent van Gogh was on when he cut his ear off. And
supposedly, yeah.
So they had this idea that absinthe created these hallucinations, and the wormwood had these hallucinogenic properties, but they've determined that that's not true. And what actually was happening... I can
attest to that. That's not true.
What actually happened was the wormwood they were using back then was rotten, and that infection essentially was causing issues. And now that there's clean standards, absinthe is kind of a nice addition. And so we've got the fountains, and we do the sugar cubes over a spoon, and Absinthe has been a surprise for me. We brought it in because we make a cocktail called the Sazerac that calls
Sure.
for absinthe. But what we didn't anticipate was that everybody was just going to start, or not everybody, but a lot of people were going to start enjoying absinthe straight up, and that's been pretty neat.
Yeah, it would be. I'm going to have to stop up and
Yeah.
check this out.
Absinthe is, I think when it came into South Dakota, there were 4 or 5 brands available. Nobody was buying it because probably nobody knew exactly what it was or how to serve it. Now there's only one brand available, but it's good, and it's been a trip, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, let's shift gears and let's spend some time talking about 1 million cups. Now, on the morning of October 29th, right?
Yes.
At the Avera Pavilion,
Yes.
there's an event taking place called 1 million cups.
Yeah,
And this sounds like, well, I don't know,
What
a
is
million cups?
what is that?
A million
Yeah.
cups of coffee? Or
Right.
cups of tea? What?
Okay, so October 29th is the first 1 million cups, but it's actually something that's going to happen every single Wednesday at 9 a.m. And so basically, I get involved in a lot of things entrepreneurial, and I go to a lot of events, and we host events. And the point is to try to create new businesses. We call them startups, businesses under 3 years old that have the potential to become really big businesses. But there was this guy, Nate Olson, who came up with this idea that he was sick of going to all these entrepreneurial meetings because they always happened at night and they always happened with alcohol and nothing ever happened. People were just catching up with each other, having a good time. And so he said, let's create a day meeting with coffee so that it's a stimulant, not a depressant, and people will get, actually get some work done. And so what 1 million cups is that what would happen if at one time during the week, Wednesdays at 9 a.m., 1 million people had a cup of coffee across the country and talked about entrepreneurship. And so it's in 58 cities right now. Yankton will be by far the smallest city that is a 1 million cup city. It's sponsored by the Kaufman Foundation out of Kansas City. And all it is a company or two will come in and pitch what they're doing, what they're making, what problem they're solving, and what they need from the community. They have 6 minutes to do that, and then there's 20 minutes of Q&A. And that might sound kind of trivial, but what it is it's a real honest look into what this company's going through. It's identifying people who are doing cool things in your community. But what I've seen in other communities is this becomes the hub for a lot of other things that happen. It's the thing that people go to, and then they create conferences, or they get jobs, or they find new business partners. It's that kind of conversation that's not necessarily happening in our community right now.
Tell me a little bit. Let's back up for a moment. When we've used the word entrepreneurial and entrepreneur, when we talk about that, Ben, separate that from business in general. How is being an entrepreneur unique in that respect?
Yeah, it is a buzzword.
Define it.
Yeah, entrepreneur is for sure a buzzword that gets overused, but how it should be used, in my opinion, is somebody who is not looking for permission to create something new. So entrepreneurs kind of set their own rules, and so that means that if they're thinking that everybody thinks they're crazy, they're still going to create the business that they need to, because they can see the future, so to speak. So think of your Steve Jobs type character. That's an entrepreneur, whereas somebody who is Warren Buffett wouldn't necessarily fit that mold to me. They would be an investor, they would be a businessman, but the entrepreneur creates something out of nothing. And when everybody else says they're nuts, they're probably onto something. And so entrepreneurs typically are the kind of people who are going to create the net job creation in this company. Since the 70s, most of the net job creation has come from small business, new businesses, startups, and those are created by those entrepreneurs.
Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to start 1 million cups here in the Yankton community.
Well, I think Nate Olson's concern about alcohol and night meetings and stuff, I've done a lot of those events. I've done them in Sioux City, Yankton, Watertown, Brookings, Sioux Falls. I've done them all over, and they have some effect. They create some networking. People do get to know each other. But what's cool about 1 million cups is that it's every single week. So if we have a quarterly entrepreneurial meeting where people are coming and talking about what they're doing, if you happen to miss that, you're not plugged into your community now for maybe 6 months. Whereas with this, you miss a week, you're only a week away from being plugged back into that community. So I like that it's weekly, and I like that it's during the day, and I like that, it becomes that hub of conversations. We don't have that downtown coffee shop where people are running into each other and brainstorming. So we're going to create that coffee shop off campus, so to speak.
Tell me a little bit about who you'd like to see at this.
Well, I think that, certainly we would like those entrepreneurs to show up, but in any entrepreneurial community that's been successful, whether we're talking about Silicon Valley or Kansas City or Boulder, there are also a lot of other people that make that happen. And those can be pushers, they can be feeders, whatever you want to label them as. They're people that are supporters. They might have expertise in business and could offer some really good feedback. They might be able to connect that person with somebody else. So really, I think that if you're a banker, if you're a chamber person, if you're working for somebody else, you'll still find value out of this, because you're going to see very clearly into somebody's mind about what they're creating, how they're doing it, how they solve problems. That could benefit you, but maybe more importantly, you can help them. If you can't create a business, maybe you have some expertise that might help that person not fail or get there quicker.
It sounds like a lot of this, what this really revolves a lot of this around, is networking.
It always is. Networking sounds, again, like one of those things that's not worth a lot, but I can tell you that almost everything that's happened in the formation of successful startup communities centers around networking, because you don't know that customer that you might need. You don't know that guy's brother-in-law that might have an expertise in this field already that can introduce you to the right investor. Networking really still has real meaning. However, I think that most of what we've come to expect of networking is after work, maybe a little presentation. There's value in those, but this is going to be a little bit more focused on okay, what's the value proposition? What's this company get out of this? What, if I attend, do I get out of this? So networking is important, but let's give it a little more purpose. We actually hold a Friday coffee already in Yankton, so we've prepared for this. We've held this open business coffee at the Hy-Vee Coffee Shop Fridays at 8 a.m. Now, one of the things that's not good about our coffee is that there's no agenda, right? So if you're going to take time off of work and you're going to go there, you want to know that it's going to be worth your time and that you're going to see something. And sometimes we don't always live up to that. I mean, sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's not. Whereas with 1 Million Cups, you'll know the agenda. You know who's coming. You know that there's value in it for you, hopefully. We have to work to make that happen. But that's the point, is let's make it specific. Let's not take your whole day. Let's not waste your time in the hopes of something coming in the future. Let's do it now.
Now, since you floated this idea around a little bit, I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you been getting from people?
Well, you can never judge if people are actually going to go to an event based on Facebook events and things like that. That's right. So we'll know a lot more after those first few meetings. But I think that what I'm hearing is that a lot of people are looking for something that is specific, that has an agenda. And once we've explained what this vague concept of 1 million cups is, we've been getting really good response. And I like to play up the card that we are the smallest city in the country. Let's not be the first city to fail at it. And I think that gets people a little excited, and they think, heck yeah, we can do this in Yankton too. We're a 1 million cup city with cities like Houston and with Boulder and with Nashville and with Kansas City and Omaha, Des Moines. And, we're a town of 14,000 people. We got accepted as a 1 million cup city because of some of the entrepreneurial things we're already doing, some of the events we've already held, the email lists we've created with things like Wire Me Awake. So we've been given trust from a big, rich grandfather called the Kauffman Foundation. We need to live up to it and not let this thing fizzle out.
I want to put you on the spot here, perhaps in a way, and pick your brain a little bit. Ben, as you look at the Yankton community, do you see openings? Do you see places for startup companies? And what type of companies do you think those would be here in the next say 5 years?
Well, I think that's a good question, and people always try to copy Silicon Valley, right? They always think about tech startups, and they think about how are we going to become the new Silicon Valley? And to me, that's not where our eyes should be. I think that if somebody creates a great high-tech software company, social network here, fantastic. We're going to help them. We're going to support them. But let's look at our strengths, right? So we have strengths that other areas don't have. We're tremendous at the outdoors. So are there new solutions to handling recreation and hunting and fishing? Probably. We've got an archery center out here that's probably the envy of the country, if not the world, that's going to have a lot of buzz around that. Why aren't we creating more archery-related startups? There are a few actually happening in town. Let's showcase them. Let's get more of them inspired to speak to our strengths. We're a big ag community. In the next 10 years, you're going to see the agricultural community switch even more to being an online world as they figure out how to be more efficient, how to plan their processes better, how to do more with less. That, again, is a strength we have that other areas in this country don't. So I'd really like to see us not try to be somebody else, but to figure out how we can work with what we have.
Yeah, that only makes sense because obviously we're not the Silicon Valley. But then again, they're not us.
That's right.
You know, they don't have the assets that we do.
Right. What they had was, when it became Silicon Valley, was they had a lot of silicon and they were
Yep.
they were creating a lot of chips, right? And so you had people who are geared into that mindset, and they talked to each other, they met with each other. Those ideas continued to bubble because of the resources they had. If we created that same sort of culture here, I think we could see high growth and new businesses too.
Now, one of the things you mentioned, Yankton by far being the smallest community involved in 1 million cups, and the reason you were given that status, I guess, was because of some of the other activities that have been going on around here. One of those I think was really interesting. It's called Think 29.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So Think 29 is actually my attempt to try to become the new Silicon Valley in a different way. Not, again, to copy what they're doing, but to take one page out of their book and say they view themselves as a region. We view ourselves as cities. So Silicon Valley is not a city. It's actually 55 cities. And around here, we're still geared into the old way of economic development, which is that Yankton competes against Vermilion, Vermilion against Yankton, Sioux Falls against Brookings, Brookings against Watertown. And my thought is we've got a lot going in this I-29 corridor. We've got 14 universities. We've got 6 venture capital funds, 4 angel investment funds. We've got 4 tech schools. We've got successful entrepreneurial companies, but we're not telling our story as a region. We're telling them as city by city. So if you look at that, it doesn't look like very much is happening here. But if we can brand those things together and say, hey, there's one place you can go to and see anything that's happening entrepreneurial, whether it's in Watertown, whether it's in Brookings, Sioux City, Fargo, then all of a sudden we've got a different narrative for this region. We've got a lot of events. We've got a lot of companies. We've got a lot of people pushing this system forward, but we can't do it by competing city against city. Certainly you might want to do that for landing the big manufacturing company. But really, if we're talking about growing this economy, we have to think a little bit farther than just our own front door.
Yeah, and one of the things I like the way you put that about actually, if you look at the corridor, we've got all these assets.
Right.
And if you look at one individual community, you'd never ever realize that. You'd only see one facet of that.
Yeah.
And so that it changes the focus and hopefully changes the way people think about economic development here throughout eastern South Dakota.
Right. And so, if we were thinking again back to the Silicon Valley, what if we were just saying San Jose, right? Okay, Facebook's from San Jose. I don't even know where they're located. Well, now that's not a very interesting story. So they've got one company, right? But then we look at Palo Alto and we've got Google, and we look at Apple that's in another city, but they can tell that as one story. They're not saying this is San Jose's story, and we just need to do the same thing. And so I want there to be that one place for a calendar. I want to hold events where people from Watertown are coming to events in Yankton. I want to really just start to brand these areas together. And we've done that. We launched in March. We have told the stories of a lot of people doing cool things entrepreneurial around here. And we've held some events. And those events are very specific. So we'll take a well-known entrepreneur from one city and we transplant them to a new city for a day. We put them in front of an audience that doesn't know them. And what that does is it gives that entrepreneur new feedback. Their community knows them. Maybe they've taken them for granted, or maybe they've just stopped getting that fresh feedback. Well, now when we plop that person from Sioux City and Brookings, people are curious about what this company is, who this person is, what problems they're solving. And that helps the entrepreneur, but it also helps Brookings to see, hey, this is our neighbor too, doing really cool things. Maybe we don't have to get the heck out of here to be successful.
One of the things that I'm interested in, and you and I have talked about this a little bit in person before, is that I'm curious, Ben, why encouraging entrepreneurship is such a passion with you? Because after all, aren't you just the guy that owns a bar?
Yeah. I get that question a lot when I go to conferences around the region too. But, my days, I've launched 8 businesses over my lifetime, and 2 of them started in my bedroom at my parents' house when I was a freshman in high school. And so I was building and selling computers and shipping them to the region and also as far away as Canada and Japan. And, I've been in a lot of businesses where I've created them, and I know that feeling. I know that it's lonely, first of all, but also I know that it's exhilarating because you're going to fail miserably or you're going to succeed. And that's a fun tightrope to walk. And so I want to just give some support to people who are also taking those risks, trying to create the new economy for this area. And really, some of it's selfish. I think that being around entrepreneurs is really a high. It's fun. And I would much rather see that person swinging for the fences than I would for the people who are constantly just bunting the ball. I want to see some home runs for this area. And if we can help, great.
Back to 1 million cups again. The morning of the 29th. What do people know if they want to attend?
So all you need to do is show up to the Avera Pavilion. It's going to be a free cup of coffee for you. Every week you show up, it's going to be free. And all you need to do is show up, have some questions, hopefully, that, you don't even have to have them until you get to hear the presentation. But we'd certainly like you to be engaged, and we'd like you to show up. We do have Facebook pages. That's facebook.com/1MC Yankton. That's a good way to connect, to see who's on the agenda, to see what's coming. But really, we just want you to be an audience member. And that doesn't mean one-way communication. It means two-way. Get ready to pepper these people with questions and see if there's a way to help or, at least know what's happening right here in your area.
Well, that was the other thing I wanted to ask about. If a listener out there today wants to know more about this event, where do they go to get that information?
Yeah, there's a 1 Million Cups website that's kind of long and probably wouldn't translate that well. So really the best way today is probably to go to facebook.com/1MC Yankton.
Either that or just stop down at Ben's.
Yeah, right. I'm always geared to talk about this kind of stuff. And I am putting this on with the help of a lot of other people. I've done a lot of projects where I've kind of just taken on the big project by myself, but I want this to be something that's owned by the community. There's no profit in it. There's no, if anything, there's expense. And so in order to do that right, we want this to be owned by Yankton. So, there's people like Carla Hummel and Cheryl Beck and Chad Eckroth and others that are really helping get this thing going. But, hopefully in 3 years, there's other people that say, hey, I want to see this thing continue and grow. I'm involved too.
Very good. Ben, I want to take a moment to thank you for spending some time with us here, and thank you for organizing events like this. Personally, I think it's very important, and I think really in a lot of ways it is the future.
Well, it's the future that we're writing, and we can either just let it happen or we can have a little say in how it looks.
Very well put. That's Ben Hanten joining us here this afternoon on Live at 5, discussing the upcoming 1 Million Cups event taking place at the Avera Pavilion the morning of October 29th. Keep it tuned right here to Yankton's home team, AM 1450 KYNT. Live at 5. We'll be right back after this.